The person you're seeing in front of you is a man called Howard. And when you first see him, you might be led to believe that underneath his tough exterior, Howard has been hiding a heart of gold this entire time. But thinking that about Howard would be your first mistake.
What exactly do you think you're doing?
I'm asking.
You're trying to insult me? Is that how you thank me?
Calm down.
Shut up! Shut up!
Howard is a man with very sick urges, and he has been overwhelmed by this hunger so much that he went as far as kidnapping a teenage girl, imprisoning her in a bunker, and waiting only until then to force himself upon her, because he knew that when they are alone there will be no one able to save her. But what's even more terrifying about him is that Howard is more than willing to do absolutely anything to make sure that the crimes he has committed against his victims will never be discovered.
I accept your apology.
Calm down.
Shut up! Shut up and stay in your seat!
He demands absolute obedience from someone who has never met him even once, and he is more than willing to kill you if you show him otherwise. And though Howard is very composed most of the time, anytime he loses control of his emotions, he has these noticeable fits. And it's clear that this is a self-soothing technique that he probably developed all the way back in his childhood, likely as a response to emotional neglect and serious abuse from his parents and the people who were around him. To make things even worse, Howard clearly has an extremely volatile mental state. We see him constantly going off over the smallest things, much to the shock and fear of both Michelle and Emmett.
I want you to apologize, to tell me you're going to behave.
I will.
You will what?
I'll behave.
Howard expects total obedience. When he wants something done, he expects you to do it without hesitation and without question. The only way to soothe his anger is to admit being at fault, regardless of the actual facts of the situation. Howard is a very unreasonable man, and he reminds me of a ticking time bomb. He is extremely sensitive and is set off at the smallest irritation.
You need to eat, you need to sleep, and you need to start showing me a little bit of appreciation.
Howard expects to be praised for doing things that were never asked of him by anybody. He treats Michelle as if she was his own property, getting angry whenever Emmett shows Michelle any affection or care towards her, such as when Emmett grabs her shoulder when she almost fell. And he even calls Michelle ungrateful for not thanking him for kidnapping her and chaining her up in his bunker. And despite his extremely disturbing sexual urges, Howard constantly proclaims that he's not a pervert. He also views most people as much more inferior to himself and being generally ungrateful. This is part of why he gets so angry when someone asks him any questions. His extreme belief that he's superior to others is why Howard thinks he deserves to be praised, and it's why he thinks he should be worshipped, even despite the fact that he hasn't provided any evidence to Michelle for his extravagant claims of the world ending. But Howard is even more broken than you might realize, because in his mind, Howard never actually left the battlefield. And we see this when he calls to Emmett right before killing him. He refers to it as being on deck. And this is obviously a reference to his 14 years spent in the Navy. His clear trauma from his years of service and his inability to move on from those experiences are also probably why he calls Michelle a traitor. It's also obvious that Howard has a clear inability to tell reality from delusions, like how despite Michelle never actually expressing any interest in him, Howard is extremely possessive of her and believes that the two of them have something special. He genuinely believes that because he supposedly saved her, that Michelle should be giving him gratitude. Gratitude which he of course expects through unwavering obedience, and for her to never talk back to him in any way. And of course he expects sexual desire and sexual acts from her. So when Howard saw Michelle laughing at Emmett's words at the dinner table, Howard became visibly upset because he realized that Emmett was the only thing that kept him from fulfilling his urges. Emmett was the only thing keeping him from taking Michelle whenever he wanted. And we clearly see Howard as a man who isn't afraid to use intimidation to get what he wants, and that he's a man who believes he should get total obedience from the people around him. We also learn that prior to his kidnapping of Michelle, Howard had already done the same thing to another girl. But unlike Michelle, this one was a teenager, and while her parents believed that she had simply ran away from home, the reality was much darker than that, because Howard was the one who had taken her. Over time, we learned the nature of his sexual desires. Like, for example, Howard's sexual attraction to Michelle is much creepier than we initially think.
Michelle is a
girl, a child.
No, she's older, so she is a
Little princess?
Like, for example, Howard's sexual attraction to Michelle is much creepier than we initially think. We see Howard specifically refer to Michelle as a girl, a child, and even more disgustingly, he even calls her a little princess. This makes me believe that when his wife decided to leave him, it wasn't because she was simply a cheater or anything along those lines. It's very possible that his ex-wife was aware of his urges, and that Howard may have tried to fulfill those sick urges by using his own daughter, and the mother who was his wife at the time may have left him to protect her child before Howard got the chance to do anything to her. Howard's incredibly sick possessiveness is shown clearly when he tells Emmett that neither himself nor Michelle find his conversations amusing, and that's obviously not true because Michelle clearly prefers Emmett's company to Howard's.
Go ahead.
I need privacy. I can't with you standing there.
You will, though.
Howard being denied to emotionally express himself, and him possibly being prevented from befriending other children, and maybe even experiencing physical abuse, would definitely explain why Howard is so bad at seeing and understanding social cues, and would also obviously explain why he has as much of a cynical view of humanity as he does. The reason he so easily believes Emmett when he falsely admits to making a weapon and that Michelle had nothing to do with that plot against him is because Howard puts Michelle on a pedestal. Howard genuinely believes that Michelle is fully loyal and only loyal to him. After all, in Howard's eyes, Michelle is his little princess, and she's fully devoted, will do anything he asks, whenever he wants and only to him specifically, and that viewpoint obviously has absolutely no basis in reality. And when he sees Michelle in despair right after he murdered Emmett in front of her, Howard immediately takes the opportunity to comfort her. And this is actually a common dynamic in abusive relationships. Howard is obviously the reason for her being in distress, but yet Howard is also the one helping her to overcome the trauma. And this dynamic is obviously perfect for creating an abusive relationship.
We can do whatever we want now. I know that this isn't the life you prefer, but I want us to be a happy family.
Okay, this was the way it was always supposed to be. Now it's just you and me.
And with him knowing there's no one around who can stop him now, this is the first moment since we've seen him that Howard finally reveals what his true intentions for Michelle have been this entire time, with him directly saying that it was always supposed to be just the two of them, and also implying that the supposed accident could also have been planned by him from the very beginning. And seeing that Howard makes the effort to shave his beard only after him and Michelle are the only ones left in the bunker, this makes it clear what his intentions always were, with him going as far as telling her that they can do whatever they want now. This shows that Howard is truly delusional, and it also shows how twisted his mind is, as he genuinely believes that the sexual desires he feels towards her are mutually shared between the two of them.
To tell me you're going to behave.
I'll behave.
I'm sorry.
I accept your apology.
Being a clearly intelligent Navy veteran, Howard is a very dangerous man with a lot of knowledge, and with him, not only being someone who can kill without hesitation, but also someone who can forcefully take a teenager, kill her and burn her body afterwards in acid with no remorse. What this shows us is that Howard is the worst type of man that exists. We know that this is a man who has sexual fantasies about his own daughter, and the fact that he makes his victims wear his daughter's t-shirt shows us that Howard has been thinking about his daughter for many, many years. But because he failed to force his daughter to fulfill his sick urges, Howard now takes whoever he can in her place instead. And he is willing to use whatever means necessary, including physical force, to do that. Howard is a terrifying, sick, and twisted man, and his death was long overdue. And the fact that he got away with his crimes for as long as he did is something that genuinely terrifies me. But the fact that there are people just like him walking around and hiding amongst us every single day, honestly, that terrifies me even more.